Jihei worked on Sereth for 2 hours. While the entire pack watched in tense silence, her hands moved with practiced precision as she extracted the twisted metal from the Alpha's chest, one careful millimeter at a time. Rith never screamed despite the agony, only gripping the edges of her makeshift bed so hard that her claws tore through them. Materialgia talked to her throughout the surgery, telling stories of soldiers she had saved in the war. She told Sereth about a young private who had taken 3 shots to the gut and walked 10 kilometers to reach the extraction point. She told her about a sergeant who had carried his wounded squad leader through enemy territory for 2 days. Without rest, she told her about all the stubborn, impossible survivors she had known because she needed Sereth to know that survival was possible. Finally, the metal came free. Jihei sealed the wound with medical adhesive and bandaged the Alpha's chest with every clean cloth she could find. Sereth's breathing was still labored, but the terrible rattling had stopped. She will live, Jihei announced. The pack erupted into howls and whimpers of relief. Vena buried her face in her mother's fur, while Kale and Sora pressed close on either side. Even Elder Tharn allowed himself a small smile. Now we need to move, Jihei said. This ship is not going to survive another night, and we need to get everyone to the colony before the next storm hits. The evacuation was slow and difficult. Jihei organized the pack with the same efficiency she had used to organize military units during the war. The strongest adults would carry the wounded on stretchers made from ship wreckages. Nursing mothers would be shielded by the elderly to protect the infants from the cold. The pups would scout ahead and warn of any dangers, and Sereth, barely conscious but refusing to be carried, would walk with Jihei's support. They set out into the frozen wasteland as a single unit. Jihei found herself at the center of the formation, surrounded on all sides by Vorke bodies that pressed against her to share their warmth. It should have terrified her. These were creatures who could kill her in an instant, predators whose kind had taken her arm and killed her friends, but instead she felt oddly safe, protected by wolves who had decided she was one of their pack. The journey was brutal and exhausting. Jihei's wounded side throbbed with every step, and her prosthetic arm kept freezing despite Sura's repairs. But whenever she stumbled, there were always paws ready to catch her whenever she needed rest. There was always a warm body ready to shield her from the wind. 3 hours from the colony, a patrol drone spotted them from above within minutes. Jihei's communicator crackled to life. Jihei, this is Colony Emergency Services. What the hell are you doing bringing a pack of wolves towards civilian territory? Other voices joined the channel. Colonists demanding to know why a human was leading enemies into their home. Jihei heard fear and anger and hatred in every voice. She understood it because she had felt the same things for 15 years. She stopped walking, and the pack gathered around her, watching her with anxious golden eyes. The elderly clutched the young protectively. The nursing mothers shielded their infant. Sereth leaned heavily on Vena but held her head high with dignity. Despite her wounds, Jihei looked at these refugees who had fled persecution and crashed on a frozen world and walked through a killing storm on the hope that humans might show them mercy. Then she keyed her communicator to broadcast on all channels so that every person in the colony could hear her words. My name is Jihei, former Sergeant Major of the Terran Defense Force. I fought in the Kithrani border war. I lost my arm to Varke claws. I watched my squad die in a Varke ambush. I have more reason to hate these people than anyone in this colony. She paused and looked at Vena, who stared back at her with hope and fear. These are not soldiers. These are not mercenaries. These are refugees, families, children. They fled their own government because they refused to become killers. They came to us for help, and I will not let them die because we cannot see past what their species has done. I am bringing them in. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." Silence filled the communication channel. Ji-hye waited, expecting the worst, expecting to be told that she would be arrested the moment she entered the colony. Then a familiar voice broke through the static. "Medical bay will be ready when you arrive." It was Dr. Park, a former military doctor who had served alongside Ji-hye in the war. More voices followed. "I have spare blankets and food," said a teacher Ji-hye recognized from the colony. "School. My barn has space for sleeping," offered a farmer whose family had been on Veckhart 7 for 3 generations. "I will open my home to anyone who needs shelter," announced an elderly woman whose husband had died in the border war. One by one, the colonists of Veckhart 7 offered help. Not all of them. Some channels remained silent, and Ji-hye knew that hatred would not disappear overnight, but enough people spoke up. Enough people chose compassion over fear. The pack arrived at the colony at dusk. Colonists lined the streets, watching in silence as the Vorkai refugees walked through their town. Some faces showed fear and some showed anger, but enough showed curiosity and compassion. Dr. Park met them at the medical center and immediately began treating the wounded. Families came forward to offer food and blankets and shelter. Children, more flexible in their thinking than adults, approached the Vorkai pups with shy curiosity that soon turned to cautious friendship. Ji-hye watched it all with exhaustion dragging at her bones and a strange warmth spreading through her chest. She had not felt this way since before the war. She had forgotten what hope looked like. 3 weeks later, the storms had finally broken and the sun shone on Veckhart 7 for the first time in a month. Ji-hye was sitting outside her depot, enjoying the rare warmth, when a shadow fell across her. She looked up to find Sareth standing before her, fully recovered from her wounds. The Alpha was magnificent in the sunlight, her silver fur gleaming and her golden eyes bright with intelligence and gratitude. "May I sit with you?" Sareth Askeja gestured to the space beside her, and Sarah settled onto the ground with the grace of a predator who had learned to be gentle. "My children told me everything," Sareth said. "They told me you walked through a storm when no one else would. They told me you fought monsters to save strangers. They told me you put your hands inside my chest and pulled me back from death. I did what needed doing," Ji-hye said. "Nothing more." Sareth turned to look at her with ancient wisdom in her eyes. "We were told that humans were soft, weak creatures who relied on technology because their bodies were fragile. We were told that you were easy prey who would crumble if challenged." She shook her head slowly. "We were told wrong. You are the strongest people I have ever known, not because of your weapons or your ships, but because of this." She pressed a paw against her own chest. "You have strength here that my kind has forgotten. You show mercy to enemies. You protect those who cannot protect themselves. You walk into storms for strangers. That is not weakness. That is the greatest strength in the galaxy." Ji-hye did not know what to say, so she said nothing. Zarath continued, "I will spend the rest of my life making sure the galaxy knows what humanity truly is. I will tell everyone who will listen about the human soldier who saved a pack of wolves. I am not a soldier anymore." Ji-hye said. Sareth showed her fangs in a Vorkai smile. "You will always be a soldier, Yoon Ji-hye. It is not about the uniform. It is about the heart that beats beneath it." They sat together in comfortable silence while the sun climbed higher in the distance. Ji-hye could hear the sound of children playing human voices and Vorkai yips mixed together in the universal language of joy. She saw Venna running with a group of human teenagers while Kale helped colonist farmers repair a damaged fence. She saw Sura sitting with a circle of human children, showing them how to build small machines from scrap metal. She saw a future that she had never imagined possible. Asia flexed her prosthetic hand. the arm that Sura had repaired. In an ice cave during a killing storm, she thought about all the hatred she had carried for 15 years. She thought about the wall she had built around her heart, and she felt that wall crumble completely as she watched wolves and humans learn to live together. The cold wind blew across the colony, but for the first time since the war, Jihei did not feel it. She was finally warm. Jihei moved down the ridge toward the circling ice hunters with her pulse rifle raised and her heart pounding steady in her chest. Fear was an old companion that she had learned to use rather than fight it, sharpened her senses and quickened her reflexes and reminded her that she was still alive when so many others had fallen. The ice hunters were massive creatures with 6 legs and jaws that could crush bone like dry wood. Their white fur blended perfectly with the snow, and only their black eyes betrayed their positions as they prowled around the wrecked ship. Jihei counted 8 of them spread in a loose circle and knew that a direct assault would get her killed. She needed to be smart. She needed to be a soldier. The pups had circled around to the far side of the crash site as she had instructed. Their job was to wait for her signal and then attack from the flank, driving the hunters into a crossfire that would break their formation. It was a risky plan that depended on 3 young Vorkai fighting like trained soldiers, but Jihei had seen the determination in their eyes, and she believed they could do it. She reached a position 50 meters from the nearest ice hunter and settled into a firing stance behind a snow-covered boulder. Creature had not noticed her yet. Its attention was fixed on the ship, where the scent of wounded prey drove its hunger. Jihei aimed for the beast's skull and squeezed the trigger. Pulse rifle cracked, and a bolt of superheated energy punched through the ice hunter's head. The creature dropped without a sound, and its companions erupted into chaos. Jihei was already moving, firing again. As she ran toward new cover, a second hunter fell with a smoking hole in its chest, and a third stumbled as her shot tore through its front leg. The remaining 5 hunters turned toward her with rage in their black eyes and charged. Jaya dove behind another boulder as a massive paw swiped through the air where her head had been. She rolled and came up firing and dropped a 4th hunter at point-blank range. Then the pup struck from the flank hail, hit the nearest hunter like a missile, his claws tearing into its throat before it could react. Vena and Sura worked together on another beast, Vena distracting it while Sura hamstring its rear legs. Their attack was savage and precise, nothing like the mindless violence Jihei had expected from Vorka. These pups fought like a unit, protecting each other and exploiting every weakness in their enemies. Jihei shot another hunter as it tried to flee, and the remaining 2 broke formation completely. One ran toward the mountains and disappeared into the storm. The last one turned its fury on Jihish, tried to dodge, but her prosthetic arm caught on the boulder and slowed her just enough. The hunter's claws raked across her side and tore through her thermal gear into the flesh. Beneath, pain exploded through her body, and she felt hot blood spill down her hip. But Jihei had been wounded before, and she refused to fall. She jammed her rifle against the hunter's belly and fired 3 times. The creature screamed and collapsed on top of her, driving the air from her lungs. Then it was over. Kale pulled the dead beast off Jihei while Vena and Sura howled in triumph. Sound echoed across the frozen mountains, and for the first time in 15 years, Jihei did not flinch at the howling of Vorkash. Let Kale help her to her feet and pressed a hand against her wounded side. The gash was deep, but not fatal. A clean cut that would heal if she could keep it from getting infected. "You fought well," Kale said, genuine respect in his voice. "I have never seen a human fight like that. I have been fighting longer than you have been alive," Jihei replied. "Come on, let us see if your pack is still breathing." They approached the wrecked ship together, and Jihei noticed that several faces were watching them through the shattered viewport's golden eyes reflected the dim light with expressions that ranged from fear to disbelief. The ship's emergency hatch opened and a large Vorkai male emerged with his claws extended and his fur bristled for combat. He was old, probably older than Jihei, with gray streaking his muzzle and scars crossing his face. "Who are you?" he demanded, staring at Jihei with suspicion. "She saved us, Elder Tharn," Venna said quickly. "She came from the human settlement. She helped us fight the Ice Hunters. She is a friend." Tharn studied Jihei with ancient eyes that had clearly seen many battles. "A human friend to Vorkai. That is not something I thought I would live to see." "I am not your friend," Jihei said bluntly. "I am someone who does not let children die when I can prevent it. Now take me to your Alpha. I understand she is injured." Tharn's ears twitched at her directness, but he stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. Inside of the ship was cramped and cold, and filled with wounded Vorkaji, counted 9 survivors, not including the pups, 2 nursing mothers with infants pressed against their chests, 3 elderly Vorkai too weak to stand, 1 adolescent male with a broken leg splintered with pieces of ship hull and lying on a makeshift bed near the back of the ship, a massive silver female whose every breath rattled with fluid and pain. This was Sareth, the Alpha, the mother of the 3 pups who had walked through a storm to save their family. A piece of twisted metal protruded from her chest just below her. Collarbone and dark blood stained the blankets beneath her. Jihei knelt beside the Alpha and examined the wound with experienced eyes. The metal had missed the heart but punctured the lung, which explained the labored breathing and the blood that flecked Sarath's lips. "She has been like this for 3 days," Venna whispered. "She told us to leave her and save ourselves, but we could not abandon her." Sarath's eyes opened at the sound of her daughter's voice and focused on Jihei with difficulty, despite the pain and the blood loss and the certain knowledge that she was dying. The Alpha's gaze held no fear. "Human," Sareth said, her voice weak but steady. "My children tell me you saved them. They saved themselves. I just helped. You came into a storm for Vorkai. Why?" Jihei looked at the wounded Alpha and thought about all the Vorkai she had killed in the war. She thought about her arm and her nightmares and 15 years of hatred. She thought about 3 pups who had trusted a stranger with their lives. "Because your children asked me to," she finally said, "and because I was tired of being the kind of person who lets children lose their mother." Sareth closed her eyes, and a sound escaped her throat that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sob. "I know what my kind has done to yours. I know we have no right to ask anything of humanity, but I'm begging you, not for myself, for them." She opened her eyes and looked past Jihei to the pack huddled in the ship. Elderly and the young and the wounded and the hopeless. Get them somewhere safe. Please, they have done nothing wrong. They only wanted a chance to live in peace. Jihei looked at the metal in the Alpha's chest and then at her emergency medical kit. She had pulled shrapnel out of soldiers during the war when no medics were available. She had saved lives with nothing but steady hands and stubborn refusal to let people die. "I am not a doctor," she said, "but I have done field surgery before. If I try to remove this metal, it might kill you." Sareth met her eyes. "I'm already dead if you do nothing. At least give me a chance to see my children grow up." Jihei pulled out her kit and began laying out instruments on the cleanest surface she could find. Pack watched in silence as the human prepared to perform surgery on their Alpha. "This is going to hurt." Jihei War-Nedzareth showed her fangs in a weak smile. "I am Vorkai. Pain is an old friend." Jihei nodded and reached for the metal embedded in the Alpha's chest. "Then let us get this over with." The storm tried to kill them within the first hour. Wind tore at their bodies with frozen claws, and visibility dropped to less than 2 meters in every direction. Ja could barely see her own feet as she trudged through snow that reached her thighs. The cold seeped through her thermal gear and wrapped around her bones like a patient predator waiting for her to slow down. But Jihei had marched through worse conditions in the war, and she refused to let a little frozen wind stop her. Now Venna stayed at her side and proved to be an excellent guide. Despite the terrible visibility, the young Vorkai seemed to navigate by instinct and smell, her nose constantly twitching as she tested the air for familiar landmarks. Sura walked behind them with Kale leaning heavily on her small shoulders. The male was struggling, but he kept moving with grim determination that Jihei respected. They traveled in silence for the first 2 hours because the wind made conversation impossible. During brief moments when the gusts died down, Jihei learned more about Volcay culture than she had ever expected to know. Venna explained that her people had once been scholars and philosophers before war became their primary export. The old texts say we were keepers of knowledge, she shouted over the wind. We built the first libraries in our sector. We invented medicines that saved millions of lives across dozens of worlds. What changed? Jihei asked. The Dominion, Venna replied with bitterness in her voice. 300 years ago, the Dominion Council decided that war was more profitable than wisdom. They began breeding our people for combat. They taught our children to kill before they could read. They sold our claws to the highest bidder. Your family resisted. Many families resisted at first, but the council punished resistance with death. Eventually, most packs gave up and accepted the new way. My father's line never stopped fighting. We preserved the old knowledge in secret. We taught our children to think and heal and create. The council called us traitors. Jihei processed this information as they pushed through a particularly deep snowdrift. She had spent 15 years believing that all Vorkai were savage killers by nature. Now she was learning that they had been shaped into killers by their own government, and that some had fought against that shaping for generations. It did not erase the pain of what she had lost in the war, but it complicated her hatred in ways she had not expected. 3 hours into the trek, they reached the crevasse. Filjeha stared at the maze of deep cracks in the ice and felt her stomach drop. The crevasses were at least 3 meters wide and deep enough that she could not see the bottom. The pups could easily leap across with their powerful legs, but Jihei was human and her legs were not designed for such jumps. We have a problem, she said. Venna examined the first crevasse and then looked back at Jihei with concern. You cannot jump this. No, I cannot. Kale limped forward and studied the gap with calculating eyes. Despite his weakness, the young male seemed to be recovering his strength as they traveled. I can carry you, he said. Jihei stared at him in disbelief. What? I can carry you across. My legs are strong enough. You can ride on my back. I'm not riding on your back like some kind of cargo. Venna touched Jihei's arm with a gentle paw. In our culture, allowing someone to ride you is a sign of great trust. Kale is offering you an honor, not an insult. Jihei looked at the young male and saw no mockery in his golden eyes. He was genuinely offering to help her, and according to Venna, he was offering to help in a way that held deep cultural significance. Will your legs hold? She asked. Kale showed his fangs in another of those strange Rakai smiles. I told you. We do not quit. Climb on, human. He crouched down, and Jihei awkwardly climbed onto his back, wrapping her arms around his thick neck and trying not to think about how vulnerable this position made her. Kale rose smoothly, despite her weight, and took several steps back from the crevasse. Hold tight, he warned. Then he ran and leaped. The world became a blur of wind and white as they sailed across the gap. Kale's legs absorbed the landing with surprising grace, and Jihei found herself on solid ice again before she could even process what had happened. 1 down, Kale said. 7 more to go. They repeated the process for each crevasse, with Venna and Sura leaping ahead and Kale ferrying Jihei across 1 jump at a time. By the 5th jump, Jihei realized that she was actually enjoying herself. There was something exhilarating about flying through the air on the back of a creature that could tear her apart with a single swipe of his claws thrust, was a strange thing halfway across the field. They stopped to rest in a shallow ice cave that provided shelter from the wind. HFY sat down heavily and flexed her prosthetic arm, which had begun to freeze up in the extreme cold. The joints were stiff and unresponsive, and she knew that, if she could not get them working again, she would be fighting with only one functional arm. Sura noticed her struggling and moved closer with curiosity in her young eyes. "Your arm is broken." "Not broken, just frozen. The cold is affecting the joints." Sura pulled a small toolkit from a pouch at her belt and opened it to reveal an array of tiny instruments. "May I look at it?" she asked. "I am good with machines. Papa taught me." HFY hesitated. The idea of letting a Vorkai touch her prosthetic, the arm that replaced what their kind had taken from her, felt deeply wrong, but Sura's eyes held nothing but genuine desire to help. She was a child who wanted to use her skills to fix something that was broken. She extended her arm. "Be careful with it." Sura's claws were long and sharp, designed by evolution for tearing flesh, but as she worked on HFY's prosthetic, those claws moved with delicate precision that would have impressed the finest human engineers. She probed the frozen joints with tiny tools and cleared ice from the mechanism with patient care. "My father believed we should build things instead of destroying them," Sura said quietly as she worked. "He said that creation was harder than destruction, and that was why it was more valuable." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was the wisest person I ever knew. I want to be an engineer like he wanted me to be. I want to make things that help people." Sura made a final adjustment, and HFY felt her prosthetic hum back to life. She flexed her fingers and rotated her wrist and found that the arm was working better than it had in months. "You are very skilled," HFY admitted. "Thank you." Sura's tail wagged with obvious pleasure at the praise. "You saved us. This is the smallest thing I can do to repay you." They rested for another few minutes before Venna announced that they needed to keep moving. The pit moving. Storm was showing no signs of breaking, and they still had 3 hours of travel ahead of them as they emerged from the ice cave. HFY spotted something in the distance, through a brief gap in the swirling snow. She could see the dark shape of a wrecked ship half buried in the Vlair mountainside. They had found the crash site, but she could also see movement around the wreckage, a large shape circling the ship, with the patient movements of predators waiting for their prey to weaken. "What are those?" HFY asked, pointing toward the shapes. Venna's ears flattened with fear. "Ice hunters. They are the apex predators of this world. They must have smelled the wounded inside the ship." Kale growled low in his throat. "How many?" HFY counted the shapes as they moved through the snow. 8. Maybe 9. Each one looks about the size of a small vehicle. Our pack cannot fight them," Venna said desperately. "Too many are injured. The ice hunters will tear through the ship eventually." HFY checked their pulse rifle and found a half charge remaining. It was not much, but it would have to be enough. "How fast can you three move if I clear a path?" she asked. The pups exchanged glances. "Fast," Kale said. "We can move very fast." HFY nodded and began planning the assault in her head. She had fought worse odds in the war, and she had survived every time. One more battle would not break her. "Here's what we are going to do," she said, and the pups leaned in to listen as the old soldier explained how they were going to save a pack of wolves from the monsters circling their broken home. HFY listened to Venna's story while she worked to stabilize Kale and warm the two sisters with heated blankets from her emergency supplies. The tale the young Vorkai told was nothing like what HFY had expected. She had spent 15 years believing that all Vorkai were the same savage killers who had ambushed her squad in the border war, but Venna's pack was different. Our father was a teacher, Vena explained, her voice steadier now that warmth was returning to her body. He taught history at the great academy on our homeworld. He believed that our people had lost their way, that we had become slaves to violence and war. Sura nodded beside her sister and added in a small voice, Papa said we were meant to be scholars and healers, not killers. What happened to him? Jiha asked. Vena's ears drooped and her golden eyes filled with pain. He spoke against the Dominion Council. He told them that the mercenary contracts were destroying our culture, that we were selling our souls for credits. They did not like his words. They killed him, Sura whispered. They called it treason, and they killed him in front of the whole city. Jihei felt something twist in her chest. She had hated the Vorkai for so long that she had never considered that some of them might hate what their own people had become. After Papa died, Mama gathered the pack and we fled. Vena continued. We sold everything we had to buy a small ship, and we ran toward human space. Mama said that humans were strange, but they had laws about refugees. She said they might give us shelter. Your ship crashed 3 days ago. Something failed in the engines during the storm. Mama tried to land safely, but we hit the mountains hard. Most of the pack survived, but many are hurt. Mama has metal in her chest. She cannot breathe well. She needs a doctor. Kale stirred on the floor near the heating unit and groaned. His sisters immediately moved to his side, and Jihei watched as they nuzzled against him with obvious relief. The male's eyes fluttered open and focused on Jihei with alarm. Human, he growled. Trying to rizz Vena, pressed him back down with gentle paws. She saved us, Kale. She brought us inside. She is helping. Kale stared at Jihei with confusion and suspicion. Why would a human help Vorkai? I have been asking myself the same question. Jihei admitted. She rose from her crouch and moved to the communications console. The storm was still blocking most signals, but she might be able to reach the colony's emergency coordination center on a direct line. She keyed in the frequency and waited. After several long moments of static, a tired voice answered. Colony Emergency Services. This is Coordinator Brask. State your emergency. Brask. This is Yunjian A at Supply Depot 7. I have 3 Vorkai juveniles here suffering from hypothermia. There are 12 more of their pack trapped in a crashed ship in the northern mountains. Several are injured, one critically. They need rescue and medical attention. The line was silent for so long that Jihei thought the connection had dropped. Then Brask spoke again, and his voice was cold. Did you say Vorkai? I did. Negative on the rescue, Jihei. We are not sending anyone into this storm to save wolves. Let them freeze. They would do the same to us. Jihei gripped the console hard enough that her prosthetic hand dented the metal. Brask. There are children in that ship. There are infants. This is a refugee pack, not a mercenary unit. I do not care if they are the most peaceful wolves in the galaxy. I lost a brother to Vorkai claws in the war. I am not risking human lives to save them. The answer is no, Jihei. Do not contact us again about this. The line went dead. Jihei stood motionless for a long moment and let the anger wash through her. She understood. Brask's hatred, because she shared it. She understood the fear and the pain and the desire to let old enemies suffer. But she also understood that hatred was a chain, and she was tired of being bound by it. She turned to find all 3 Vorkai pups watching her with expressions that mixed hope and despair. They will not help us, Vena said softly. Will they? No, Jihei replied. They will not. Sura began to cry. Soft whimpering sounds that reminded Jihei of a human child in pain. Kale wrapped a weak arm around his youngest sister and glared at Jihei with defiant eyes. Then we will go ourselves. We will save our pack or we will die trying. You can barely stand, Jihei pointed out. You would not make it 100 meters in the storm. Then what do we do? Venna demanded, her voice cracking with desperation. Our mother is dying. Our pack is dying. We came to humans for help, and you will not help us. Jihei looked at the three young Vorke and saw her own reflection in their pain. She had been young once and full of hope before the war. Had beaten it out of her. She had believed that the galaxy could be a kokoro, better place before she learned that cruelty was the only constant across all species. These pups still had that hope. They had walked through a killing storm on the slim chance that a human might show them mercy, and Jihei realized that she had a choice. She could let that hope die and prove that humans were exactly as cruel and unforgiving as the Varkai Dominion Counselor. She could do something that terrified her more than any battlefield she had ever faced. She could show compassion to her enemies. How far did you say the crash site was? She asked. Venna blinked in confusion. 6 hours on foot in normal weather, perhaps longer in the storm. Jihei moved to her storage locker and began pulling out cold weather gear. She grabbed her heaviest coat, her thermal boots, her emergency medical kit, and enough supplies for a 3-day trek. What are you doing? Kale Eskeja shouldered her pack and checked the charge on her pulse rifle. I'm going to regret this, she muttered to herself. She turned to face the pups and felt something shift inside her chest. It was not forgiveness, and it was not absolution. It was simply the recognition that she could not let children die when she had the power to save them. Can any of you guide me to the crash site? She asked. Venna's ears perked up and her golden eyes widened with disbelief. You would come with us. You would help our pack. Someone has to, Jihei said. And it appears that someone is me. Venna rose to her feet with renewed energy and grabbed her sister's paw. I can guide you. I remember the path. Sura can help navigate. She has the best nose in the pack. And me, Kale said, struggling to stand. I will not stay behind while you risk your lives. Jihei studied the male's trembling legs and pale fur. He was in no condition to make a 12-hour round trip through a blizzard, but she saw the determination in his golden eyes and recognized it as the same stubborn pride that had kept her alive through the war. Can you keep up? She asked. Kale lifted his chin and showed his fangs in what might have been a smile. I am Vorkai. We do not quit. Jihei almost laughed. It was the exact same thing she had said to her commanding officer when she insisted on returning to duty after losing her arm. Fine, she said. But if you collapse again, I am leaving you in a snowbank. Until I come back. She knew it was a lie even as she said it. She also knew that Kale knew it was a lie. Sometimes lies were necessary to preserve. Dignitaire Jihei opened the depot door and let the frozen wind blast into the room. The storm was still raging, and the darkness outside was absolute. Somewhere in those frozen mountains, a pack of refugees was waiting to die, and one old human soldier was apparently their only hope. Stay close, Jihei ordered. Do not stop for anything, and if you see anything moving that is not one of us, tell me immediately. The three pups nodded and fell into formation behind her as they stepped into the storm. Jihei allowed herself one moment of doubt. She was walking into a blizzard to save a species she had hated for 15 years. She was trusting three young Vorkai to guide her through terrain that could kill her in minutes. If she made a wrong step, she was probably going to die out here in the cold, and no one would ever know why. But as Venna pressed close to her side and Sura's small paw found her prosthetic hand, Jihei realized that she did not care about dying. She cared about doing something right for the first time in 15 years, and that was enough. The wind screamed across the frozen Mayan colony of Vekhart 7. Like a wounded beast that refused to die, Sergeant Major Yoon Jihei stood at the window of her supply depot and watched the ice storm tear across the landscape with fury she had not seen in her 15 years on this frozen rock at the edge of human space. She was 62 years old, and her body carried the scars of 3 decades of military service. Her left arm was a basic prosthetic made of dull gray metal and simple joints that she refused to upgrade, despite the colony doctors telling her that newer models would serve her better. She did not want a better arm. She wanted to remember what the old one had cost her. Kathrani border war had taken many things from Jihite. Had taken her arm in a Vorkai ambush that killed 11 members of her squad. Had taken her ability to sleep through the night without waking to phantom screams. It had taken her faith in the galaxy as a place where different species could exist without tearing each other apart. Now she ran a supply depot on a frozen world where nothing ever happened, and she preferred it that way. The communicator on her desk crackled with static as the storm interference grew worse. Colony communications had been down for 2 days. Transport ships were grounded. Emergency services were overwhelmed with calls from settlers whose heating units were failing. Jihe had enough supplies stockpiled to last a month and enough solitude to last a lifetime. She turned from the window and moved toward her small kitchen to make tea when a sound cut through the howling wind. It was faint at first, and she thought she had imagined it. Then it came again, a scratching against the outer wall of the depot. Jihe grabbed her pulse rifle from its rack by the door and moved toward the sound with the careful steps of a soldier who had survived too many ambushes to take any noise lightly. Scratching grew more desperate. She reached the reinforced door that led to the depot's loading bay and pressed her hand against the cold metal. Something was out there, something alive against every instinct that told her to stay inside and let the storm handle whatever creature was foolish enough to be outside in this weather. Jihe punched the door release and stepped into the loading bay. The cold hit her like a physical blow even with the bay doors closed. The temperature was well below freezing. She activated the external lights and moved toward the outer wall where the scratching had originated. What she found made her stop dead in her tracks. 3 Vorkai huddled against the wall. They were juveniles, barely more than pups, their silver-white fur matted with ice and their golden eyes dim with exhaustion. One of them was unconscious, a male whose breathing was so shallow that Jihe could barely see his chest rise and fall. The other 2, both female, looked up at her with expressions that mixed terror and desperate hope. Jihe raised her rifle. The Vorkai were wolf-like predators who stood on 2 legs and towered over most species in the galaxy. They were known as fearsome mercenaries and ruthless hunters during the border war. Vorkai packs had fought against human forces with savage efficiency. A Vorkai ambush had taken Jihe's arm and killed her friends. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to turn away and let these creatures freeze. But these were not warriors. These were children. The larger of the 2 conscious females raised a trembling paw in a gesture that might have been surrender or might have been a plea. "Human," she said in broken common, her voice weak and shaking. "Please, we mean no harm. We are dying." Jihe kept her rifle raised but did not fire. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Vorkai have no business in human space." "Refugees," the female said. "Our pack, we fled. We are not soldiers. Please." The smaller female whimpered and pressed closer to her unconscious companion. She could not have been more than 8 or 9 years old in human terms. A child protecting her brother. Jihe lowered her rifle. She did not holster it, but she lowered it. "How many of you are there?" "3 here," the older female said. "Our pack, 12 more. They are trapped. Mountain cave, 2 hours north. Our ship crashed. We walked to find help. Kale collapsed. We could not carry him further. Please, our mother is hurt. She is dying." The wind shrieked through the gaps in the loading bay doors, and the temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Jia looked at the 3 Vorkai pups and saw her own death in every nightmare she had. ever had about the war. She saw claws and fangs and golden eyes in the darkness. She saw her squad torn apart, while she screamed and bled, but she also saw 3 children who had walked through a killing storm to find help for their family. 3 children who were now looking at a human with eyes full of hope, despite everything their species had done to hers. "Can you walk?" Jihei asked the older female. "I can walk, yes, sir, I can walk." Kale cannot. Jihei slung her rifle over her shoulder and moved toward the unconscious male. He was heavy, probably 60 kilograms of muscle and fur, even as a juvenile. But Jihei had carried wounded soldiers across battlefields, and she was not about to let a little weight stop her now. "Grab his other side," she told the older female. "We need to get him inside before the cold kills him." Together, they dragged the unconscious Vorkai through the loading bay and into the main depot. The warmth hit them like a wave, and the 2 conscious females gasped. With relief, Jia deposited tail near the heating unit and immediately began stripping off his ice-crusted outer fur to check for frostbite. "What is your name?" she asked the older female as she worked. "Venna," the female said. "I am Venna. This is my sister Sura and my brother Kale. Our family name is Korath." "Jihei," she said shortly. "Yoon Jihei, former Sergeant Major, Terran Defense Force." Venna's ears flattened against her skull at the mention of military service, but she did not retreat. "You were a soldier. I was. You fought my kind." Jihei looked up from her examination of Kale and met Venna's golden eyes. "I did. And your kind took my arm and killed my friends, so understand that every part of me is screaming to throw you back into that storm." Sura whimpered and pressed against her sisters. Venna did not look away from Jihei. "Then why did you bring us?" Inside, Jihei was silent for a long moment. She did not have a good answer to that question. She only knew that when she had seen 3 children dying in the cold, something in her had refused to let them die. "Because you are children," she finally said, "and I am not a monster." She turned back to Kale and continued her examination. The male was suffering from severe hypothermia, but his vital signs were stabilizing. In the warmth, he would live if he stayed inside and rested. "Now tell me about your pack," Jihei said. "Tell me everything, and do not leave anything out." Venna took a shaky breath and began to speak. "And, as Korath, Jihei listened to the tale of a refugee pack fleeing persecution and a mother dying in a mountain cave. She felt something stir in her chest that she had not felt in years. It might have been compassion. It might have been duty, or it might have been the first crack in a wall of hatred she had spent 15 years building around her heart.